You've seen actors pretend to be tough, but what about the ones who actually lived it? The coal miners, the war veterans, the daredevils who refused to fake a single punch. This is their story. Douglas Fairbanks, the original daredevil. Long before stunt doubles became standard, Douglas Fairbanks was already putting his life on the line. In the 1910s and 1920s, he built his fame not only through charm, but through raw athletic ability. Audiences came to expect one thing from him: danger performed live on camera. Fairbanks didn't wait for Hollywood to hand him an image. He created it. A trained gymnast and fencer, he used skills from his youth to give silent adventure films a new energy. When cameras rolled on The Mark of Zorro in 1920, he scaled rooftops, swung from balconies, and landed jumps that would break most men. Every leap was his, no tricks behind the curtain. The daring grew bigger with Robin Hood in 1922. Studios spent nearly $1 million to build a massive castle set, and Fairbanks climbed every inch of it. He charged across stone walls, battled dozens of extras with swords, and leapt into the air without hesitation. Crowds were stunned, and critics labeled him the screen's king of swashbucklers. His risk-taking wasn't a one-off. In The Thief of Baghdad, 1924, he pushed even further. Scenes showed him swinging from enormous ropes, balancing high above the set, and diving into action without safety nets. The film's budget ballooned past $2 million, gigantic for its time, but much of the spectacle rested on Fairbanks's physical endurance. He gave audiences a thrill they couldn't find anywhere else. Off-set, his lifestyle matched the screen persona. He kept strict fitness routines, trained with Olympic-level coaches, and insisted that no one else could perform his stunts better. His confidence sometimes clashed with directors, but it worked. Box office numbers kept climbing, and moviegoers lined up to see what stunt he would risk next. Errol Flynn, Hollywood's wild swordsman. Chaos often followed Errol Flynn, both on and off screen. By the late 1930s, he was the studio's go-to swashbuckler, and Warner Brothers leaned into his appetite for risk. When cameras rolled on Captain Blood in 1935, Flynn fought with real steel. He trained under fencing master Fred Cavens, but he refused to slow down for safety. The duels moved at near combat speed, and audiences could feel it. 2 years later came The Adventures of Robin Hood. Flynn didn't hold back. The sword fights with Basil Rathbone became Hollywood legends because neither man wanted to fake it. In one sequence, their blades struck so hard that sparks actually flew. Rathbone later admitted that Flynn was reckless but brilliant, a natural in battle scenes. Offset, danger didn't stop. Flynn's passion for sailing pushed him into storms off the coast of Cuba. One trip nearly killed him when his yacht smashed against rocks. Rescuers barely pulled him out in time. Instead of learning caution, he sailed again weeks later. Friends joked that he chased near-death experiences as if they were hobbies. Bar fights added to the legend. Flynn's nights in Los Angeles clubs often ended with broken glasses, bruised knuckles, and gossip column write-ups. His reputation as Hollywood's wild man was earned, not invented. Even Warner Brothers executives, desperate to protect their star, admitted he was uncontrollable once he had a drink in his hand. Stunt doubles were rarely used. In films like The Seahawk, 1940, Flynn clambered up rigging, swung onto decks, and fought full crews with a grin. Accidents happened, but he shrugged them off and kept shooting. Producers knew insurance costs were rising, but Flynn's charisma on-screen guaranteed profits. The press loved reporting his antics. Headlines mixed his film heroics with stories of real brawls, making it hard to separate the man from the character. His adventurous life fed the myth, and Warner Brothers leaned on that image even as they struggled to control him behind the scenes. John Wayne, the cowboy who kept riding. In Hollywood westerns, toughness was expected, but John Wayne lived it long after cameras stopped. His rise came in the 1930s with smaller roles, but even then he insisted on doing his own riding. Horses threw him, saddles broke, and dust filled his lungs, yet he never asked for a stand-in. By the late 1930s, Wayne's physical resilience became part of his brand. On the set of Stagecoach in 1939, director John Ford pushed him through grueling desert shoots. Temperatures soared over 100 degrees, and cast members fainted under the heat. Wayne kept riding, sweating through, take after take. Ford later admitted that Wayne's endurance helped sell the image of the unshakable cowboy. Injuries followed him throughout the 1940s and 1950s. Falls during fight scenes cracked ribs, and long shoots left him with chronic pain in his shoulder. Yet when asked, he brushed it off with a joke and walked back into the next shot. His refusal to slow down impressed crews who saw the punishment he absorbed. By the 1960s, Wayne was already battling health issues. He underwent surgery for cancer in 1964, losing a lung and several ribs. Doctors advised rest. Wayne ignored them. Within months, he was back on horseback, filming The Sons of Katie Elder. His gait looked stiffer, but his presence on screen stayed commanding. Audiences never knew how badly his body hurt. The punishment only increased in True Grit, 1969. Wayne, wearing an eye patch as Rooster Cogburn, insisted on charging his horse through streams and rocky terrain himself. When he won the Academy Award for the role, reporters noted that he filmed with the same grit his character carried. Even in the 1970s, when age slowed him, Wayne refused to fake it. In The Shootist, 1976, his final film, he performed horseback scenes while fighting advanced cancer. Crew members said he refused offers of body doubles, determined to finish his career the way he started, by doing it himself. Kirk Douglas, the Chin of Steel. He earned his reputation the hard way. In the late 1940s, he broke through with Champion, 1949, playing a ruthless boxer. The fight scenes weren't staged at half speed. Douglas absorbed real hits to make the punches look convincing. Crew members recalled that he left the set bruised almost every night, but he insisted that audiences deserved authenticity. His intensity only grew with larger productions. In The Vikings, 1958, Douglas clashed swords on icy terrain. One scene ended with a broken tooth after a mistimed strike. He spat blood, reset himself, and finished the day's shoot. Later, he admitted that the pain was real, but claimed it kept the film from looking fake. His stubbornness gave directors confidence that he could survive anything. The most famous ordeal came with Spartacus, 1960. Douglas not only starred but produced the epic. Long battle sequences were filmed under blazing sun, and he personally charged into lines of armored extras. Balls from horses and rough sword duels left him battered, but he refused to delegate the action. Friends warned that he was risking long-term injury. He waved them off, convinced that leading an army on screen meant leading it for real. As decades passed, his toughness extended far beyond film sets. In 1991, at age 74, Douglas boarded a helicopter near Santa Paula, California. Minutes after takeoff, it collided mid-air with a small plane. The crash killed 2 other passengers. Douglas survived with serious back injuries but stunned reporters by walking out of the hospital days later. He later admitted he was haunted by the tragedy, yet the fact that he lived at all seemed miraculous. 3 years later, a stroke left him with impaired speech. Most actors would have retired quietly. Douglas instead fought through therapy and returned to public life. In 1996, he walked on stage at the Academy Awards to a standing ovation. His voice was slurred, but his spirit wasn't broken. He even published books and gave interviews well into his 90s, often joking that nothing could keep him down for long. Steve McQueen, the King of Cool Under Fire. His career took off in the late 1950s with Wanted, Dead or Alive, where he carried himself with the swagger of a man who had already survived more than most. Raised in reform schools in the Marine Corps, McQueen brought that toughness into Hollywood with a chip on his shoulder. By the 1960s, his obsession with racing was no secret. McQueen spent weekends on motorcycles and sports cars, often entering professional competitions. In 1962, he placed second at the Elsinore Grand Prix, riding against seasoned racers. Studios worried that a crash could end their investment, but McQueen ignored warnings. He famously said, "Racing is life. Anything before or after is just waiting." That mindset carried into his films. In The Great Escape, 1963, McQueen insisted on doing much of his own motorcycle work. The legendary fence jump was finished by stuntman Bud Ekins, but the rest of the high-speed chases across German fields were McQueen himself. He skidded, crashed, and got back up until director John Sturges called it good. Fans still debate which shots were him, which was the point. He blurred the line between actor and stuntman. His most famous dare came with Bullitt, 1968. The car chase through San Francisco streets became one of cinema's most iconic sequences. McQueen drove the Mustang himself for most of the chase, hitting speeds that alarmed insurance agents. During one take, he nearly lost control on a corner, missing a camera rig by inches. Warner Brothers executives begged him to let a double finish, but McQueen pushed through. The result cemented him as Hollywood's definitive action star. Racing off-screen nearly killed him. At the 12 Hours of Sebring Endurance Race in 1970, McQueen competed with a broken foot held together by a cast. Driving a Porsche 908, he and teammate Peter Revson finished second against professionals. Reporters couldn't believe he had endured the pain for 12 hours behind the wheel. Friends later admitted he risked permanent damage, but McQueen dismissed the concern. Even when illness struck in the late 1970s, he didn't soften. Diagnosed with mesothelioma, McQueen continued racing and performing stunts until his body could no longer handle it. Charles Bronson, tough man of the steel mills. Before Hollywood, survival meant coal mines. Charles Bronson grew up in Pennsylvania as one of 15 children in a Lithuanian-American family. His father died when he was 10, leaving the family in poverty. By 16, Bronson was working in the mines himself, covered in soot and hauling loads heavier than his frame suggested. The grit of those early years never left him. World War II gave him another trial. Bronson served as a tail gunner on a B-29 bomber in the Pacific. The role was one of the most dangerous in the service. Gunner compartments were cramped, vulnerable, and often the first targets of enemy fire. He survived missions that killed many of his fellow airmen and returned home with a Purple Heart. That real-life experience hardened him long before the cameras rolled. When he entered acting in the 1950s, Bronson carried himself with quiet intensity. He wasn't the charming lead, he was the tough man in the corner, the one directors cast when they needed authenticity. In House of Wax, 1953, and later The Magnificent Seven, 1960, his performances drew from a life already marked by danger and labor. On set, he didn't act delicate. Bronson was known for doing fight scenes full force, sometimes leaving his co-stars with real bruises. In The Dirty Dozen, 1967, his military background gave him credibility, and he powered through punishing action sequences with little complaint. Other actors remembered him as the most serious man on set, someone who never needed to be reminded to look tough. He was tough. By the 1970s, Bronson had become an international star through films like Death Wish. The vigilante action scenes were shot in rough New York neighborhoods, and the actor demanded to be in the middle of them. Crew members recalled his ability to perform long nights of filming without showing fatigue. His stoicism impressed colleagues, but also made him intimidating. Few dared to joke around with him. Lee Marvin, brawler-turned-actor. War shaped him before Hollywood ever did. Lee Marvin enlisted in the U.S. Marines during World War II and fought in the Battle of Saipan in 1944. He was shot in the buttocks by machine gun fire, the bullet severing his sciatic nerve. The injury ended his combat service, but he carried the limp for the rest of his life. That limp later gave his screen presence a rough edge no acting school could teach. Back in the States, Marvin drifted into acting, bringing his real battlefield experience into every role. He started with small parts in the early 1950s, often cast as villains or soldiers. His scarred face and deep, gravelly voice made him stand out instantly. Directors knew they were hiring someone who didn't have to pretend toughness, he lived it. Off-screen, Marvin's barroom reputation grew almost as quickly as his film credits. Stories of fistfights in New York and Los Angeles followed him. He drank hard, fought harder, and rarely walked away clean. Yet the chaos only added to his aura. By the mid-1950s, producers were both worried about his temper and eager to capture his raw energy on screen. On film sets, he refused to coast. In The Big Heat, 1953, Marvin shocked audiences by playing a brutal gangster who scars Gloria Graham's character with boiling coffee. The scene was staged but drew on his natural intensity. In The Dirty Dozen, 1967, he led an ensemble of actors through grueling military drills, insisting on realism in every shot. Co-stars later recalled that he treated training days like real boot camp. Stunt doubles were offered, but Marvin avoided them whenever possible. In fight scenes, he often connected for real. Actors who worked with him joked that a punch from Marvin was part of the job. His willingness to take and deliver hits kept scenes from looking staged. As his fame grew, the contradictions followed. Marvin could be generous and funny one moment, then unpredictable and violent the next. His toughness wasn't carefully managed, like a studio image. It was who he was. Bruce Lee, the fighter who changed cinema. Martial arts weren't a hobby for Bruce Lee. They were survival. Growing up in Hong Kong during the 1940s, street fights were common, and Lee rarely backed down. By his teenage years, he trained under Wing Chun master Ip Man, sharpening skills that would later shake global cinema. When he moved to the United States in the late 1950s, Lee taught martial arts while trying to break into acting. Students included actors, athletes, and even future Hollywood stars. His reputation spread not because of flashy demonstrations, but because he fought with precision and intensity that startled anyone who stepped into his studio. Television gave him his first big showcase. As Kato in The Green Hornet, 1966, Lee stole scenes with explosive movements that looked faster than the cameras could catch. American audiences had never seen fight choreography delivered with such speed. What looked like trick editing was often just Lee moving at full power. Film roles in Hong Kong elevated him further. The Big Boss, 1971, and Fist of Fury, 1972, showed Lee dismantling opponents with strikes and kicks delivered in long takes. Directors didn't need quick cuts. Lee's timing carried the action. Audiences roared in theaters, and his fame spread across Asia. By the time Enter the Dragon premiered in 1973, Lee had become a global phenomenon. He choreographed most of the film's combat himself, insisting that fights look brutal and believable. On set, he demanded his partners strike at him with real force, adjusting movements until they matched his standards. Stuntmen later admitted that working with him left bruises, but also gave them credibility. Away from cameras, Lee tested himself constantly. He entered full-contact sparring sessions with world-class fighters, never turning down a challenge. Stories circulated of him flooring opponents in seconds, though Lee avoided bragging. His focus stayed on refining technique and proving that martial arts could be both art and discipline. Though his life ended tragically at 32, Bruce Lee left behind a record of toughness that combined street fights, film sets, and cultural barriers. Mickey Rourke, boxer with a Hollywood comeback. Comebacks in Hollywood usually mean a new role. For Mickey Rourke, it meant stepping out of the ring after years of punishment. In the early 1980s, he broke through with Body Heat and Diner, building a reputation as one of the most talented actors of his generation. But he also carried a streak of volatility that mirrored his characters. By the early 1990s, Rourke walked away from acting to pursue professional boxing. It wasn't a gimmick. He entered legitimate fights, facing trained opponents in real arenas. Over the course of 8 matches, he compiled an unbeaten record with 6 wins and 2 draws. Reporters covered him not as a celebrity sideshow, but as a legitimate fighter. The cost was steep. Rourke suffered broken ribs, a shattered cheekbone, and a severely damaged nose. Surgeons later reconstructed parts of his face with cartilage taken from his ear. Years of sparring and headshots left him battered, and his looks, the same ones that once drew comparisons to Brando, were permanently altered. Friends pleaded with him to stop, but he kept training until the damage became impossible to ignore. When he returned to Hollywood in the late 1990s, producers were hesitant. His appearance had changed, his reputation was rough, and his career looked finished, yet Rourke refused to quit. Small parts in films like Once Upon a Time in Mexico slowly rebuilt interest, showing that his screen presence hadn't disappeared with his old looks. Then came The Wrestler, 2008. Playing Randy the Ram Robinson, Rourke poured his real injuries and scars into the performance. Training with professional wrestlers, he executed punishing moves in the ring, absorbing blows that most actors would never attempt. Critics noted that the role felt autobiographical, an aging performer fighting for relevance through physical pain. The film earned him a Golden Globe and an Academy Award nomination. Even after The Wrestler, Rourke continued balancing film with combat sports. He sparred, trained, and even entered a professional boxing match in Moscow in 2014 at age 62. While the fight sparked debate, it confirmed what his life had always shown. Mickey Rourke never stopped testing himself against pain. Tom Cruise, Hollywood stunt addict. Studios spend millions trying to keep their stars safe. Tom Cruise spends millions proving he doesn't need the safety net. Since the 1980s, he's been pushing himself into stunts that most professionals would turn down. What started as a few risky moves in Top Gun grew into an obsession that defined his career. In Mission Impossible, 1996, Cruise began by dangling from wires in a high-security vault. That sequence became iconic, but it was only the start. For the sequel in 2000, he climbed sheer rock faces in Utah without a harness for key shots. By 2011's Ghost Protocol, Cruise raised the bar again. He strapped himself to the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, the world's tallest building, and sprinted across glass windows more than 1,000 feet in the air. Safety wires were hidden, but the danger was real. Behind the scenes, clips showed crew members stunned that he even attempted it. The risks kept escalating. During Rogue Nation 2015, Cruise hung onto the side of a military plane as it took off, enduring winds at over 100 miles per hour. The stunt required 8 takes, and each time he was actually bolted to the aircraft. Co-star Simon Pegg later admitted the crew couldn't believe what they were watching. In Fallout 2018, he chased villains across rooftops in London. A miscalculated jump left him with a broken ankle as cameras rolled. Instead of stopping, he pulled himself up, finished the sprint, and only then collapsed. The shot stayed in the final cut, proving his determination to finish no matter the cost. Even into his 60s, Cruise hasn't slowed down. For Dead Reckoning Part 1, 2023, he drove a motorcycle off a cliff in Norway, parachuting into a canyon. He repeated the stunt multiple times to get the angle right. Director Christopher McQuarrie called it the most dangerous sequence ever attempted for film. While Hollywood uses doubles, green screens, and digital tricks, he insists on the real thing. Every risk, every injury, every terrifying leap belongs to him.
One of these men lit himself on fire on live television. Another once broke up a real gang fight between extras. And number 6, he destroyed his entire face, then smiled about it. You think actors are soft? Think again. Bronson's prison yard training. He didn't grow up with movie dreams. Charles Bronson grew up with a shovel. Born in 1921 in a Pennsylvania coal town, he was one of 15 children. The family spoke Lithuanian at home and didn't have running water. By age 10, he was working in the mines to help buy food. After World War II, where he served as a tail gunner in the Air Force, Bronson drifted west and tried acting. He wasn't polished. He wasn't charming. Studios didn't know what to do with him. He had the look of someone who'd been in real fights. Because he had. Most actors trained at private gyms. Bronson didn't. He worked out in prison yards. Real ones. He trained with ex-cons and day laborers who didn't care about technique, just strength and grit. He wanted to look like he could hurt someone. And he did. Push-ups on gravel. Rope climbs with no gloves. Makeshift weights made from scrap metal. No music. No mirrors. Just bruises and calluses. That's how he built the body you see on screen. By the mid-1950s, he started landing small parts. War movies, westerns, tough guy roles. Directors didn't cast him for dialogue. They cast him because when he looked at you, it felt like a threat. On set, he refused stunt doubles, said they were a waste of time. During a fight scene in The Magnificent Seven, he accidentally knocked another actor out cold. They kept filming. The crew didn't even blink. He didn't talk much, didn't smile unless he had to, didn't care if you liked him. He came to work, did the job, and left. Simple as that. Clint Eastwood once said Bronson wasn't acting. That's just how he was. Bronson didn't move to Hollywood to chase fame. He moved because it was warmer than the coal fields of Pennsylvania. The rest? That was just muscle and timing. Lee Marvin gets shot, keeps filming. He was tough before he ever hit a movie set. He fought in World War II as a Marine, saw combat in the Pacific, and was shot in the back during the Battle of Saipan. One bullet clipped his spine. Another nearly took his sciatic nerve. He spent over a year in recovery. They gave him a medical discharge. He was 21. Lee Marvin didn't talk about the war much. When people asked, he'd just say, "I got off easy," which tells you everything. In the 60s, he became the face of rough, violent men on screen. No-nonsense detectives, vengeful loners, hired guns with dead eyes. The voice was deep. The stare was colder. In 1967, he filmed Point Blank, a violent, gritty revenge story. The movie was shot mostly on location, real streets, real buildings, real bruises. During one take, a squib, the kind of small charge used to fake bullet hits, misfired and caught him in the ribs. It wasn't serious enough for the hospital, but it tore skin and caused a deep welt. He didn't stop. He finished the scene, stayed in character, and never asked for a second take. Later, when someone on set asked if he was okay, he looked down, wiped the blood off his shirt, and said, "I've had worse." Then he lit a cigarette. That wasn't rare for him. Marvin hated fakes. He did his own fight scenes, most of his stunts, and pushed to keep things realistic, even if it meant someone getting hurt. Off-screen, he wasn't exactly mellow. He drank hard, brawled in bars, and had a temper that made directors nervous. But he showed up on time, knew his lines, and didn't complain. That made him easy to hire, even if it meant a little chaos. He once said, "If I wasn't acting, I'd probably be in jail." Maybe. Or maybe he'd still be in uniform. Eastwood's freezing river stunt. By 1971, Clint Eastwood had already carved out his image. Quiet, calm, deadly. Dirty Harry would lock it in. The role wasn't just about holding a gun. It was about holding your nerve. And Eastwood had plenty. Late in the film, there's a chase that ends with Harry diving into a rock quarry pond. What most people didn't know: that water wasn't just cold, it was near freezing. Not special effects, not a set. Just runoff, rain-fed, and stagnant. Producers offered a stunt double. He refused. Said it wouldn't feel real. Said it wouldn't be real. They rolled cameras. He jumped. 8 times. No wetsuit, no padding, no heat lamps. He surfaced with his face tight and his breath short, but he never called cut. Between takes, crew members offered warm towels and hot drinks. He took the towel, gave it back, and went in again. People on set said the water smelled bad. He never said a word about it. He'd done worse before. On Rawhide, he was known for taking real falls off horses. On Hang 'Em High, he let himself be pulled by a noose just to get the shot right. When a rope burn left a scar, he shrugged it off. That's what separated him. Eastwood never made a scene about doing a stunt. He didn't joke around. He didn't act like a hero. He just did the thing no one else wanted to do and did it like it was normal. Years later, a crew member said Clint didn't even change his expression after the last take. Just walked out, dried off, and said, "All right, what's next?" That quarry scene helped turn Dirty Harry into a hit. People felt the weight of it, because it wasn't fake. The water was freezing, the fall was real, and the man doing it was exactly who he looked like. Eastwood didn't perform toughness. He showed up with it. Robert Mitchum's chain gang days. He wasn't shocked when the cops came for him. It was 1948, and he'd just been caught at a party in LA with marijuana. At the time, that wasn't just a bad headline, it was a career-ending scandal. Studios freaked out. Reporters circled. Most actors would have denied everything. Mitchum didn't bother. He told the press, "Well, it was kind of dull in jail, but I met a lot of nice people." The court gave him a 2-month sentence at a California prison farm, complete with hard labor. He wasn't put in protective custody. No special treatment. He wore the uniform, did the work, and slept in the same barracks as everyone else. Chain gangs weren't a joke. Days started early. Inmates cleared brush, worked road crews, and hauled gear under the sun. Mitchum didn't complain. He actually posed for photos behind the fence, smirking. He told a reporter he was getting a tan and learning about real acting. When he got out, he went right back to work. Most stars would have tried to hide it. Mitchum didn't care. He treated the whole thing like a press junket. Studios expected his career to fall apart. Instead, ticket sales went up. Within months, he was back on screen in Rachel and the stranger opposite Loretta Young and William Holden. The scandal didn't touch the box office. If anything, it made him more appealing. People liked that he didn't flinch. He didn't fake an apology. He didn't play victim. He just owned it. Years later, Mitchum said, "The only difference between me and most actors is that I never learned to keep my mouth shut." He wasn't a method actor. He didn't rehearse much. But he had presence, attitude, and a voice that sounded like gravel in a coffee can. Directors said he was lazy, but always perfect on the first take. He never tried to be a role model. He smoked, drank, got in fights, and kept showing up to work. Jail didn't slow him down. If anything, it made him harder to ignore. Jack Palance lights himself on fire. He wasn't afraid of fire. In fact, he once lit his own arm on fire on national television just to prove a point. That wasn't a movie stunt. That was real life, on Ripley's Believe It or Not. In 1982, he was co-hosting the show, standing next to a table with a small flame-retardant cream display. The idea was simple. Apply the cream, light the sleeve, and show it wouldn't burn. The producers wanted a technician to do it. Palance said, "No, I've got it." The sleeve went up in flames, not a little puff, actual fire. The studio audience gasped. The crew panicked. Palance didn't move. He kept talking as the flames danced on his arm. When it burned out, he casually brushed off the ashes and cracked a smile. He didn't even flinch. That wasn't unusual for him. Palance had a long history of doing things his way. During World War II, he was a bomber pilot trainee. A fiery crash during training left his face severely burned. He went through multiple surgeries and came out looking harder than before. When he got to Hollywood, directors didn't cast him as a pretty boy. He played killers, brawlers, and guys who looked like they could break bones just by glaring. He often insisted on doing his own stunts, even in his 60s. He trained as a boxer, sparred regularly, and once did one-arm push-ups on live TV at age 73. Not once. Several. At the Oscars. People said he was difficult. He didn't care. If he thought a script was weak, he'd say so. If he didn't like a co-star, he'd let them know. But when the cameras rolled, he was all business. The fire stunt became a legend, not just because he did it, but because he did it without warning. No special effects, no prep crew, just a man who knew what pain felt like and didn't fear it. He didn't act fearless. He actually was. Mickey Rourke breaks his face. In the early 90s, Mickey Rourke was tired of acting. He'd gone from critical darling to tabloid magnet. Instead of chasing roles, he made a left turn straight into a boxing ring. Not celebrity boxing, actual professional fights. He trained like a real fighter. 6 days a week. Ran, sparred, took hits. His trainer, Freddie Roach, said Rourke could have gone far if he'd started 10 years earlier. But Mickey wasn't in it for titles. He said he missed the violence. He wanted to feel something again. Between 1991 and 1994, he fought 8 matches, undefeated, with 6 wins and 2 draws. But the cost was brutal. He broke his nose twice, shattered his cheekbone, cracked ribs, damaged his tongue. Doctors warned he might lose movement in his face. He kept going anyway. By 1992, his face was unrecognizable. Bones had shifted. His skin looked swollen. He underwent multiple surgeries just to breathe and chew properly. One operation went wrong and made things worse. Hollywood didn't know what to do with him. The handsome, smirking heartthrob from 9.5 weeks had been replaced by a thick-jawed, scarred version of himself. Casting offers stopped. Directors backed off. But he didn't seem to care. He was living in a small apartment, hanging with his dogs, training, and staying out of the spotlight. When asked if he regretted it, he said, "I'd rather be punched in the face than kiss someone's ass in Hollywood." Years later, he slowly returned. The Wrestler in 2008 brought him back. He played a washed-up fighter with a broken body because that's who he was. Rourke didn't fake toughness. He didn't need to. He lived through broken bones, bad press, ruined looks, and still came back swinging. Most actors avoid pain. Rourke chased it. Danny Trejo breaks up riot. His face tells a story, but his past? That's another level. Before he ever stepped in front of a camera, he did time in San Quentin. Armed robbery, drug charges, solitary confinement, the real stuff. By the time he got out, he wasn't just clean. He was dangerous in a different way, calm, controlled, and respected. In the early 90s, Trejo was working on a low-budget movie in East LA. The set had hired local gang members as extras. It was supposed to be a street scene. But tension built fast. 2 rival sets recognized each other. Trash talk turned to threats. People started reaching for weapons. The director froze. Security backed off. But Trejo stepped in. He walked right into the middle of the crowd and didn't raise his voice. He just said, "Not here, not now, this is my set." They stopped. Not because he was yelling, but because they knew who he was. He wasn't a celebrity. He was one of them. A guy who'd done time, earned respect, and walked the walk. Within minutes, the tension broke. The scene got filmed. No blood, no cops, just Trejo. It wasn't the first time he stepped in like that. On other sets, he helped young actors stay clean, talked to extras struggling with addiction. Producers didn't hire him for PR. They hired him because he could handle chaos. He started acting by accident. He was helping a friend stay sober and ended up on a movie set. A casting agent saw him and said, "You look like a convict." He smiled and said, "I am." Trejo's roles have ranged from action villains to taco commercials, but his real life beats any script. He's been stabbed, shot at, and locked up. Now he runs recovery centers and youth outreach programs when he's not filming. He once said, "Everything good that's happened to me is from helping someone else." That day on set, he didn't throw a punch. He didn't yell. He just stood there, steady, and that was enough. Tom Cruise hangs off plane. He doesn't fake stunts. If there's a way to do it for real, he'll do it. And in Mission Impossible Rogue Nation, he proved it again by hanging off the side of a military transport plane. For real. No green screen. No tricks. It was an Airbus A400M, a 4-engine military aircraft designed to haul tanks. Cruise was strapped to the door by a thin harness, wearing a gray suit and wind goggles. The plane accelerated down the runway and took off, with Cruise clinging to the outside at 5,000 feet. They filmed it 8 times. Each take lasted several minutes. He was hit by wind, debris, and freezing air. A bird strike was a real concern. So was temporary blindness from wind exposure. Cruise had to keep his eyes open during the shot. He trained for weeks just to withstand the pressure. The studio was nervous. Insurance agents were horrified. The crew kept asking if he was sure. He kept saying yes. They even had a backup plan, film the shot with a stuntman and swap his face in post. Cruise refused. He said the audience would know. And that was the point. He's done this before. In Ghost Protocol, he scaled the Burj Khalifa. In Fallout, he did a halo jump from 25,000 feet. He also broke his ankle mid-jump, finished the take, and didn't stop filming. For Cruise, it's not about proving something, it's about control. He once said, "If I'm going to die, I want it to be on my terms." A little intense, but it explains a lot. The airplane stunt made headlines. Behind-the-scenes footage showed how dangerous it really was. One wrong move, one gear failure, and it was over. But Cruise didn't flinch. He hit his mark, gave the signal, and trusted the pilot. Most actors talk about pushing limits. Cruise just does it, then goes home, rewatches the footage, and plans something bigger. Keanu's spine surgery, no pain meds. In 1997, Keanu Reeves was getting ready to film The Matrix. He had one problem: his spine was falling apart. Doctors found that 2 of his spinal discs were severely compressed. One had started to calcify, his legs were going numb, he needed surgery fast. He went under the knife just weeks before stunt training began. It was a delicate operation. One bad move could have paralyzed him. But Reeves didn't delay production. He showed up to Kung Fu rehearsal wearing a neck brace. He could barely kick. So for the first few months, the stunt team focused only on arm moves and upper body forms. He pushed through it, no painkillers. He wanted to stay mentally sharp and didn't want meds clouding his head during choreography. That kind of training was brutal. Most actors would have taken 6 months off. Keanu didn't. He showed up every day, quiet and focused, learning complex martial arts scenes while hiding nerve damage. The crew didn't even know he was recovering from surgery. One of the stunt coordinators later said, "We just thought he was a little stiff." He didn't talk about the pain. He didn't use it as an excuse. When it came time to film, he nailed it. The backflips, the wire work, the slow-motion kicks. You'd never guess he was healing from spinal surgery the whole time. And that wasn't the only time he powered through something ugly. Keanu has filmed through broken ribs, busted ankles, and injuries from motorcycle crashes. He just doesn't broadcast it. He once said, "Pain is just part of life. You can't let it stop you." He's known for being calm, generous, and a little mysterious. But under all that is a guy who works harder than anyone, complains less than anyone, and shrugs off pain like it's no big deal. For The Matrix, he wasn't just pretending to be superhuman. He was already halfway there. Jason Statham's truck rescue dive. He was supposed to drive a stunt truck, fire a prop gun, and stop just short of a dock. Easy scene, done it 100 times. But on The Expendables 3, something went wrong. The brakes failed. Instead of stopping, the truck shot off the edge and plunged straight into the Black Sea. Everyone on set froze. The truck sank fast. No stunt double, no safety crew inside. Just Statham. Most people panic underwater. He didn't. He kicked out the driver's side window and swam to the surface. No air tank, no wetsuit, just raw instincts and years of diving experience. Before acting, Statham was a competitive diver for Britain's national team. For 12 years, he trained full-time, performing high dives and complex flips. That background probably saved his life. Crew members thought he'd be shaken. He wasn't. He swam back to shore, shook off the water, and asked when they were filming the next shot. Sylvester Stallone later said, "We'd all be dead. But not Jason. He's the real deal." He wasn't trying to be a hero. He just acted fast. And afterward, he didn't brag. He didn't ask for the footage to go viral. He just wanted the scene redone, this time with working breaks. That kind of mindset is what makes him different. Statham doesn't use stunt doubles. In The Transporter, he trained in Krav Maga, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and even did his own driving. In Crank, he hung off a helicopter 3,000 feet up. No rigging, just straps and confidence. He once said, "If I'm not doing my own stunts, I'm not doing my job." What happened in the Black Sea wasn't part of the script. It wasn't a movie moment. It was real. Cold water, a sinking truck, no backup plan, and Statham handled it like it was just another Tuesday.
She won an Oscar with a comeback and spent the next 30 years proving her critics right. Joan Crawford's worst role? Herself. Oscar high, career confusion. She won an Academy Award in 1946 for Mildred Pierce, and for a minute, it looked like she'd pulled off the ultimate comeback. She had been dropped by MGM just a few years earlier, labeled box office poison in a 1938 ad alongside other stars past their prime. But when Mildred Pierce hit, she wasn't just back, she was dominant. That win inflated her already well-known sense of control. Crawford took her pick of roles and passed on some of the best scripts of the era. One of the biggest? All About Eve. The lead part eventually went to Bette Davis, who earned critical raves and an Oscar nomination. Crawford had called the script talky. Instead, she chose safer projects like Flamingo Road, Harriet Craig, and The Damned Don't Cry. They weren't flops, but they didn't elevate her. Audiences started seeing the same performance again and again. Dramatic tears, icy glares, and monologues about betrayal. One reviewer even said she looked like she was competing with herself. Behind the scenes, directors struggled to manage her. She demanded specific lighting, insisted on rehearsing scenes long past the scheduled wrap time, and sometimes took over costume design. Makeup artists were warned not to touch her brows. One former Warner Brothers producer said, "Working with Joan wasn't just directing, it was negotiating." Her need for image control was relentless. She reportedly kept a mirror off camera during shoots to check herself between takes, and she had final say over camera angles. If the cinematographer disagreed, she'd call the studio boss directly. Publicly, she still drew headlines and packed theaters. But the freshness of Mildred Pierce was gone by the end of the decade. In 1949, the New York Times reviewed Flamingo Road and remarked, "Miss Crawford seems to be playing Miss Crawford." She wasn't evolving, she was repeating. And while she thought she was at her peak, Hollywood was quietly preparing for her decline. Queen Bee or set tyrant? By the early 1950s, Joan was still booking leading roles, but now the drama off-screen was getting just as loud as anything in the script. She starred in Sudden Fear in 1952, earning another Academy Award nomination. The film did well. Critics praised her intensity, but the moment didn't last. Behind closed doors, directors said she was becoming almost impossible to work with. She questioned blocking, changed camera setups, and would stop entire scenes mid-take if she didn't like her co-star's line reading. Things reached a boiling point during the 1955 production of Queen Bee. It was supposed to be a sharp melodrama. Instead, it turned into a lesson in survival for everyone on set. Crawford reportedly dominated every department. If she didn't like a prop, it vanished. If a supporting actress stood out too much, Joan ordered the costume department to dull her wardrobe. She was notorious for arriving on set with her own cooler, filled with vodka and Coca-Cola labeled for medicinal use. The cast and crew called it the fifth assistant director. Actress Betsy Palmer, who played the young ingenue, later recalled Crawford mocking her makeup and wardrobe in front of the crew. "She could freeze you with a look," Palmer said, "and if you cried, she liked it." Cinematographers weren't safe either. She had favorite angles and would bark orders if the lighting didn't hit the cheekbone just right. One grip reportedly said, "If the light was wrong, she didn't fix her position. She fixed you." Director Ranald McDougall, who also wrote the script, admitted she pushed for rewrites almost daily. He gave in more often than he wanted to. By the time filming wrapped, no one wanted a sequel. Crawford blamed her co-stars for the bad energy. Publicly, she smiled through press junkets and interviews. But inside the studio gates, the stories were circulating. Joan wasn't worth the chaos. studio exit and public meltdowns. By the mid-1950s, the studio system that had built Joan Crawford's career was collapsing, and she wasn't adapting well. After Queen Bee, she signed with Columbia Pictures and made a few more films, Autumn Leaves and The Story of Esther Costello. Both were dramatic, emotional, and heavily marketed around her image. But younger stars like Audrey Hepburn and Kim Novak were taking center stage. Joan still demanded top billing. Audiences were starting to move on. Then came the real trouble. Warner Brothers let her go in 1959. After a long career with major contracts, she was now a free agent, with fewer offers and rising costs. Studios weren't interested in her rules anymore. One exec said she could sell a movie, but the price was dealing with Joan Crawford. Around the same time, public appearances started backfiring. She showed up late to a charity event in Boston, slurring words and stumbling through her speech. The press brushed it off as illness. Privately, friends knew she was drinking more heavily. She started accepting television interviews to stay visible, but they weren't doing her any favors. On one talk show, she snapped at the host for calling her former screen queen. She was visibly agitated and corrected every question. The footage didn't go viral, this was the 50s, but word spread. She'd also gained a reputation for calling journalists after bad reviews to argue, sometimes late at night. Columnists quietly stopped taking her calls. By 1960, she was a walking contradiction. She still acted like she was at the center of Hollywood, but the calls weren't coming. She hadn't had a real hit in years, and behind the glam shots in photoplay, there was a woman holding tighter and tighter to a career that was slipping through her fingers. Pepsi power plays and boardroom battles. In 1955, Joan married Alfred Steele, the president of Pepsi-Cola. He died just 4 years later, leaving her widowed, and with a new role, board member. It was supposed to be a graceful pivot. Instead, it turned into another battlefield. Joan jumped headfirst into the corporate world, attending shareholder meetings, launching publicity campaigns, and personally appearing at bottling plants. She called herself Pepsi's First Lady. Executives called her something else. Disruptive. She traveled across the country doing PR events in full movie star wardrobe. Local plant managers were confused. One Pepsi exec said she'd show up dressed like it was the Oscars to tour a syrup facility. Behind the scenes, tensions built. Joan demanded to approve advertisements and even vetoed slogans she didn't like. She once refused to appear at an event because the backdrop clashed with her outfit. Her name may have brought publicity, but it came with chaos. The board quietly moved to limit her power. In 1966, they forced her into early retirement. She was told during a board meeting, no warning, no dignity. She left the building in tears, reportedly muttering that they'd betrayed her. She told the press it was her decision. It wasn't. Years later, one board member said she didn't know how to be anything but a star. That works in movies, not in business. Crawford never forgot the humiliation. She continued calling herself a Pepsi ambassador and kept attending events on her own dime, even after being pushed out. This wasn't just about soda. It was about identity. Acting offers were drying up, and the last organization that needed her just shut the door. She had money, but no real career left. She still gave interviews pretending she had scripts lined up, but insiders knew there weren't any. Family fallout and Christina's silence. By the late 1960s, the cracks in Joan Crawford's carefully crafted image weren't just professional, they were personal. And her adopted daughter Christina was at the center of it. From the outside, Joan played the role of the perfect Hollywood mother. Magazine spreads showed her decorating nurseries and posing with matching outfits. But the reality behind closed doors wasn't as polished. Joan had adopted 4 children, Christina, Christopher, and twins Kathy and Cindy. By the late 60s, she was only speaking to one of them. Christopher had been sent to a military academy, then cut off entirely. The twins were mostly out of the picture. Christina was still around, but just barely. Tension between mother and daughter was obvious during press interviews. In 1968, when Christina took a small TV role on The Secret Storm, Joan called the producers and insisted on taking over the role while her daughter recovered from an illness. She was 60, playing a 24-year-old. The audience laughed. Christina was humiliated. They stopped speaking soon after. Neighbors and staff started talking. One former housekeeper said Crawford ran the home like a barracks. Rules were strict, punishments were harsh, and affection came with conditions. Christina would later claim her mother's behavior bordered on abusive, allegations that at the time weren't public but were quietly spreading in Hollywood. In 1973, Christina was hospitalized for a ruptured ovarian tumor. Joan never visited. Friends asked why. She reportedly replied, "She made her bed." To outsiders, Crawford still appeared poised and generous. She donated to charities, gave red carpet interviews, and smiled for cameras. But behind the PR photos was a woman estranged from her children, isolated in her own home and clinging to an image that wasn't holding up anymore. The next year, she'd try to return to the screen one last time. It would not go well. Final films and career freefall. Crawford's final chapter as a working actress came in 1970, and it wasn't glamorous. She starred in Trog, a low-budget British horror movie about a prehistoric creature discovered in a cave. She played Dr. Brockton, a scientist who teaches the creature to speak and wear clothes. The costume looked like a cheap Halloween mask. The script was worse. Joan had taken the role out of desperation. Major studios weren't calling, and she needed money to maintain her lifestyle. She reportedly clashed with the director and asked for script rewrites. The production team said she drank heavily on set and kept forgetting lines. When Trog was released, critics didn't hold back. Variety called it a waste of film. Others said it looked like a parody. Joan later admitted she never saw the final cut. She told friends it was beneath her. She never made another movie after that. By now, even the fan magazines had backed off. She was no longer the subject of admiration. She was nostalgia. Young audiences didn't know her. Older ones didn't want to see her like this. In 1972, she was honored at a film retrospective. She arrived in a heavy gown and thick makeup, waving to a crowd of mostly older fans. One reporter called it a tribute wrapped in denial. She still called herself a working actress. She still told friends she had offers on the table. But no one was offering anything. Trog had done more than kill her career. It turned her into a punchline. The Queen of MGM was now remembered for a caveman movie. The photo that ended it all. By 1974, Joan Crawford wasn't taking many public appearances, but she made an exception for a charity event with Rosalind Russell. They'd both been stars in the same golden era. It seemed safe, until the photo came out. A black and white picture of Joan and Rosalind made the newspapers. It wasn't flattering. Her face was gaunt, her makeup heavy, and her eyes looked sunken. To most readers, it was just another red carpet shot. To Crawford, it was devastating. She called friends in a panic, said she looked grotesque. She reportedly cried for hours and demanded the photo be pulled from circulation. It wasn't. Editors ignored her. That was the last time she appeared in public. She canceled all future appearances, turned down interviews, refused to pose for photographers. According to close friends, she stopped looking in mirrors altogether. Her publicist later said she was terrified of being seen as old. And just like that, she vanished. There were no more red carpets, no fan meet and greets, no cameo offers. Her housekeeper reported that Crawford started wearing large sunglasses indoors and only allowed visitors in dim lighting. She turned away reporters at the door and kept curtains drawn day and night. She still answered fan mail, typed of course in perfect format, but only when the notes were properly respectful. Any letters that hinted at her age or past films were thrown out. One producer claimed she called him in 1974 asking about a role that didn't exist. She sounded hopeful, he said, and completely detached from reality. The woman who once demanded the spotlight now wouldn't even open the blinds. The Rosalind Russell photo didn't kill her career. That was already done, but it ended her last illusion, that she could still control how the world saw her. From this point on, Crawford was no longer a public figure. She was a myth hiding in plain sight. Alone in apartment 22G. She spent her final years in a modest apartment on Manhattan's Upper East Side, Unit 22G. It wasn't small, but it wasn't the mansion she used to host parties in either. She kept it spotless. Not just clean, sterile. Visitors said the smell of disinfectant hit you at the door. Furniture was arranged to perfection. White gloves were worn by cleaning staff. Not a fingerprint allowed. She still kept her vanity table, loaded with powders, creams, and fake eyelashes she didn't use anymore. She rarely wore makeup, rarely changed clothes, but the routine was still there. She had no live-in staff, just a rotating housekeeper and a nurse who came a few hours a day. She rarely took calls, and when she did, she demanded they keep it brief. Most of her old Hollywood friends had stopped calling anyway. She stayed up late watching her old movies on TV. She'd call the station sometimes to complain if they ran an ad break in the wrong place. Once she reportedly asked them to play Humoresque at a different hour so she could sleep after. Books lined the apartment, mostly self-help, etiquette, and old fan magazines with her on the cover. She had stacks of letters, many unopened, some from Christina. She didn't answer. Meals were delivered, groceries were ordered by phone. She insisted they be left at the front desk, no direct interaction. When staff visited, she often pretended she wasn't home. The woman who once threw legendary dinner parties now ate cottage cheese and crackers alone. She edited old clippings, cut her name out of magazines and pasted them into scrapbooks. In one, she labeled herself the last star, not in irony, in full sincerity. In 1977, she gave away her beloved Shih Tzu, Princess Lotus Blossom. She told her maid she didn't want the dog to watch her decline. 3 months later, she passed away in her bedroom. No funeral, no fanfare. She left behind wigs, perfume, and a will that would ignite a firestorm. Death, will, and the final blow. Joan Crawford died on May 10, 1977, in her Manhattan apartment. She was 73. The official cause of death was a heart attack. She had complained of fatigue the night before and passed away quietly in her bedroom. Her housekeeper found her that morning. There was no drama, no dramatic exit, just silence. She'd already planned the details. No funeral, no memorial. She didn't want mourners. She had her body cremated and her ashes placed next to her last husband, Alfred Steele, at Ferncliff Cemetery. But the peace didn't last long. When her will was read, jaws dropped. She left money to charities, to loyal staff, and to a few friends. But 2 names were notably excluded: Christina and Christopher, her 2 oldest adopted children. The line in the will was cold and direct. It is my intention to make no provision herein for my son Christopher or my daughter Christina for reasons which are well known to them. It wasn't just an omission, it was a public rejection. The press picked it up immediately. Tabloids printed the line in full. Gossip columns speculated about what the reasons could be. Hollywood insiders already knew there had been tension for years, but this felt like a final slap. Christina issued a short statement. Christopher said nothing. Friends of Crawford defended her. They said the kids were ungrateful. Others weren't so sure. By cutting them out so publicly, she opened the door for what came next. And it wasn't a tribute, it was a takedown. Christina's book was already in motion. Christina Crawford didn't wait long. She had already started writing a book before Joan died. The will just lit the match. In 1978, less than a year after her mother's death, Mommy Dearest hit bookstores. The cover was simple, just Christina's name and the words, "The story of my mother, Joan Crawford." It sold out in days. The book alleged years of physical and emotional abuse. Christina claimed she was beaten, gaslit, and terrorized over minor mistakes. The most famous story? Wire hangers. Joan allegedly flew into a rage because Christina had used the wrong kind. The image was unforgettable and deeply damaging. Critics were split. Some believed every word, others called it exaggerated. But the public didn't care. Joan Crawford, once a symbol of elegance, was now the face of celebrity cruelty. Mommy Dearest became a cultural lightning rod. It stayed on the bestseller list for months. The backlash was fast and loud. Joan's defenders, including actresses like Myrna Loy and Douglas Fairbanks Jr., called it slander. But others came forward with their own stories. Some said they'd seen Joan slap her daughter at parties. Others recalled her coldness and control. In 1981, the book was adapted into a film starring Faye Dunaway. The performance was bold, but turned Crawford into a camp icon. It wasn't a tribute. It was a caricature. Dunaway later regretted it. Christina didn't. The book didn't just stain Joan's reputation. It rewrote it. From award-winning actress to cautionary tale, Christina never apologized for writing it. She said, "I wanted the truth out, even if people didn't like it." Joan Crawford never got to respond. She died with her version of the story intact. But in the years that followed, it wasn't her version that survived. It was Christina's. Some Hollywood stars weren't just heavy drinkers, they were so drunk they had to be carried onto set. Others slurred their lines, forgot entire movies they starred in, or even died with a drink in their hand. This is the dark side of fame, the actors who were completely wasted at all times. John Barrymore. He wasn't just a star, he was Hollywood's first great alcoholic. Long before rehab was an option, he drank himself into a joke. Studios covered for him at first, but by the end, even they couldn't save him. In the 1920s, Barrymore was on top of the world. He had the looks, the voice, and the talent. But off camera, he was rarely sober. His drinking got so bad that directors had to feed him lines off camera because he couldn't remember them. Some days, he couldn't even stand up straight and had to be held up by crew members just to finish a scene. Everyone in Hollywood knew he had a problem. He showed up drunk, stayed drunk, and somehow still got roles, at first. But things fell apart quickly. One night during a live performance, he completely blanked out. Instead of trying to recover, he turned to the audience and slurred, "Line, please?" The show was shut down early, and from then on, everyone knew Barrymore wasn't the same actor anymore. By the 1930s, his drinking wrecked his career. Studios didn't want to risk hiring him, and directors stopped covering for him. Even when friends tried to help, he kept drinking. His body started shutting down, shaking hands, failing memory, and a career in free fall. It wasn't just his career that crumbled. His personal life was a mess. He burned through marriages, lost his fortune, and ruined friendships. He was once considered one of the greatest actors of his time, but by the end he was a cautionary tale. The final years? A disaster. He was broke, sick, and barely able to work. Friends had to help pay his bills, but nothing could stop him from drinking himself to death. And if you think Hollywood let him rest in peace, think again. His so-called friends stole his corpse as a prank, dragging his lifeless body around for one last drunken joke. Barrymore was the blueprint for Hollywood self-destruction. He was the first major star to drink himself into oblivion, but he wouldn't be the last. W.C. Fields. While most stars tried to hide their drinking, Fields didn't even bother. He carried a thermos full of gin everywhere, labeled with innocent words like pineapple juice or orange soda. Everyone knew what was inside, but no one dared to stop him. By the time he made it big in Hollywood, Fields was already a heavy drinker. He had spent years in vaudeville, performing night after night while nursing a constant buzz. Drinking was part of his personality, both on and off screen. He played lovable drunks in films, but behind the scenes he was far from charming when the alcohol took over. His drinking got so bad that directors had to shoot around his hangovers. Mornings were a lost cause. He was either too sick or still drunk. By afternoon, he'd start sipping from his juice thermos just to get through filming. Some days he was so hammered that he slurred entire scenes, forcing multiple retakes. Other times he skipped set entirely, leaving studios scrambling to explain his absence. Fields had a sharp wit, but when he drank, his temper flared.
He'd curse out producers, insult his co-stars, and storm off set if something didn't go his way. His drinking wore down his body over time. His once sharp comedic timing started slipping, and so did his health. By the 1940s, his body was failing him. His liver was shot, and doctors warned him that if he didn't quit drinking, he wouldn't last much longer. But Fields didn't care. Instead of quitting, he had a liquor stash built into his hospital room. Nurses would find hidden bottles of whiskey under his mattress, and he'd sneak drinks when no one was looking. He drank until his final breath. When Fields died in 1946, people weren't surprised. His liver had given up long before he did. His career was legendary, but so was his drinking. And unlike other stars, he never tried to pretend otherwise. W.C. Fields wasn't just drunk all the time, he made sure everyone knew it. Errol Flynn. He was the ultimate movie hero, dashing, fearless, and always up for an adventure. But off-screen, he was a reckless alcoholic who drank so much that even Hollywood couldn't keep up with him. If there was a bottle around, Flynn was already ahead of the game. Flynn's drinking wasn't just a bad habit, it was his lifestyle. He'd start his day with champagne, switch to hard liquor by lunch, and keep going until he passed out. Studios tried to hide it, but his drinking made productions a nightmare. He slurred his lines, stumbled through action scenes, and sometimes needed to be propped up just to finish filming. During The Adventures of Robin Hood, 1938, he was so drunk during fight scenes that stunt doubles had to take over more than usual. In They Died with Their Boots On, 1941, he kept falling off his horse because he couldn't stay balanced. Directors grew frustrated, but Flynn's star power kept him employed, at least for a while. His drinking wasn't just for fun. Flynn was self-medicating, drowning out personal demons with endless bottles of rum and whiskey. He was constantly in legal trouble, facing accusations of assault and scandalous affairs. His court cases became just as famous as his movies, but instead of slowing down, he drank even harder. By the 1950s, Hollywood had enough. Studios stopped covering for him, and his reputation crashed. His once chiseled looks were puffed and bloated from years of heavy drinking. His liver was failing, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. In 1959, Flynn's body finally gave up. At just 50 years old, he died of a massive heart attack, but doctors found his organs were destroyed from years of alcohol abuse. His liver was so damaged that they said it looked like he belonged to an 80-year-old man. Flynn was Hollywood's original bad boy, but his addiction was his downfall. He lived fast, drank hard, and never made it to old age. If Hollywood was a party, Flynn drank until the lights went out. Richard Burton. He was a functioning alcoholic who drank his way through nearly every movie he made. Unlike others who tried to hide it, Burton showed up wasted on set and still delivered Oscar-worthy performances. But behind the scenes, his addiction controlled everything. Burton's drinking started early. By his 20s, he was already downing multiple bottles of liquor a day. Success only made it worse. He became one of Hollywood's highest-paid actors, but with that fame came an endless supply of booze. During Cleopatra, 1963, where he met Elizabeth Taylor, he was drunk in nearly every scene. The two fueled each other's addictions, turning their romance into a storm of booze, fights, and makeups. His drinking was legendary. He once chugged 3 bottles of vodka before noon, then went straight to filming like nothing happened. Some directors learned to work around it, shooting scenes early in the day before he got too drunk. Others just gave up, letting Burton slur his way through takes. By the 1970s, his addiction took its toll. His once powerful voice turned hoarse, his sharp looks faded, and his body started breaking down. He tried quitting. Doctors warned him he was drinking himself to death, but every attempt ended the same way: back at the bar. Burton died in 1984 at just 58 years old. His liver was completely shot, and his body was wrecked from decades of drinking. He left behind a legacy of brilliant performances, but also a reputation as one of Hollywood's most tragic drunks. Unlike others who drank themselves out of a career, Burton somehow kept going.
but his addiction won in the end. Peter O'Toole. He was a Hollywood legend, but he was also rarely sober. He built a career on charm, wit, and raw talent, while drinking so much that he sometimes couldn't remember filming entire movies. O'Toole's drinking started early. By the time he became famous in Lawrence of Arabia, 1962, he was already drinking more than his body could handle. He was known to down multiple bottles of whiskey in a single night, then show up to set the next morning like nothing happened, until it started affecting his work. His reputation as a drunken genius followed him everywhere. He would slur through scenes, forget his lines, or suddenly fall asleep in the middle of filming. On Goodbye, Mr. Chips, 1969, production shut down multiple times because he was too wasted to work. In interviews, he later admitted, "I have no memory of making some films." His drinking wasn't just a problem for Hollywood. It nearly killed him. In the 1970s, doctors found that years of alcohol abuse had destroyed his stomach lining, leading to internal bleeding and emergency surgery. They told him if he didn't stop drinking, he wouldn't survive. O'Toole tried to quit but never fully gave it up. He continued acting, but his wild behavior and heavy drinking kept him from reaching his full potential. Even later in life, when he claimed to be sober, people doubted it. His reputation was too legendary. He lived longer than most Hollywood drunks, making it to 81, but his body was wrecked from decades of drinking. When he died in 2013, fans remembered him as a brilliant actor, but also one of Hollywood's most infamous alcoholics. Peter O'Toole didn't just drink, he turned it into an art form. Oliver Reed. His reputation for out-drinking entire bars made him a legend, but it also destroyed his career and eventually his life. Reed's drinking was on another level. He didn't just sip whiskey between takes, he chugged entire bottles. He once challenged 5 Royal Navy sailors to a drinking contest and won, downing over 100 pints of beer in a single session. By the end, he had to be carried out unconscious. On set, he was a nightmare and a spectacle. Directors never knew if they were getting a world-class actor or a slurring disaster. During The Three Musketeers, 1973, he showed up so drunk that he could barely stand. He got through the scenes, but barely. By the 1980s, his drinking had wrecked his reputation. Studios didn't want the risk, and his career spiraled downward. But the real tragedy came during Gladiator, 2000. Reed had been given one last shot at a big role playing Proximo, but instead of staying focused, he went on one final drinking spree. While filming in Malta, he downed 8 pints of beer, 12 shots of rum, half a bottle of whiskey, and a few doubles of cognac, all in one sitting. That night, he collapsed and died of a massive heart attack. His death was so sudden that the film had to use CGI to finish his scenes. Reed had drunk himself to his own tragic ending. Oliver Reed's drinking wasn't just a problem, it was his identity. He outlived many of Hollywood's legendary drunks, but in the end, alcohol still won. Mickey Rourke. He had everything: looks, talent, and a rising career. But instead of building on it, he drank, fought, and burned every bridge in Hollywood. His downfall wasn't just alcohol, but it played a massive role in his destruction. In the 1980s, Rourke was unstoppable. Movies like 9.5 Weeks and Angel Heart made him one of Hollywood's most in-demand actors. But behind the scenes, he was drinking heavily, getting into bar fights, and making himself unhireable. Directors hated working with him because he was either too drunk to perform or too aggressive to control. His drinking wasn't just a problem on set, it ruined his personal life. He trashed relationships, got arrested multiple times, and became known as Hollywood's biggest liability. Instead of cleaning up, he walked away from acting and became a professional boxer, a move that only made things worse. Boxing destroyed his face, but he still drank through the pain. By the late 90s, he was broke,
washed up and completely forgotten by Hollywood. Even he admitted, "I was drinking myself to death." He lost roles, lost friends, and almost lost his life. But somehow, Rourke pulled off a comeback. He got sober, repaired some of the damage, and landed The Wrestler, 2008, a film that mirrored his own self-destructive past. It earned him an Oscar nomination, but even with success, he struggled to stay clean. Mickey Rourke should have been one of Hollywood's greatest legends. Instead, alcohol and bad choices turned him into a cautionary tale. Even today, he's a reminder of how fast Hollywood can chew you up if you let it. Dennis Hopper. He was Hollywood's ultimate wild card. For decades, he was either too drunk, too high, or too unhinged to function. Somehow, he still delivered legendary performances, even when he could barely stand upright. Hopper's drinking started early, but by the time he became famous in Easy Rider, 1969, it was out of control. He drank on set, between takes, and sometimes during filming. He was so wasted while directing the last movie, 1971, that the film became an incoherent disaster, and Hollywood blacklisted him for nearly a decade. During Apocalypse Now, 1979, Hopper was so drunk and coked out that he couldn't remember his lines. Director Francis Ford Coppola had to feed him one sentence at a time because giving him a full script was pointless. Somehow, his manic energy worked for the role, but off-screen, he was a walking train wreck. Hopper's reputation was legendary, but his career kept crashing and burning. He spent most of the 80s either too wasted to work or banned from Hollywood entirely. At his lowest, he lived in the desert, talking to himself and drinking until he hallucinated. He later admitted he was drinking 28 beers, a bottle of whiskey, and doing 3 grams of cocaine every day. Then, out of nowhere, he got sober. In 1986, he made an insane comeback with Blue Velvet, playing one of the most terrifying villains in film history. This time, the madness was acting, not alcohol. Dennis Hopper drank his way through decades of Hollywood, burning bridges and ruining opportunities. But unlike most stars on this list, he actually cleaned up and made it back. His career should have been over, but somehow he outlived his own chaos. Christopher Hitchens. He was Hollywood adjacent, a constant presence in interviews, debates, and film discussions, always with a drink in hand. Unlike most people on this list, he didn't try to hide it. In fact, he embraced his alcoholism and made it part of his public persona. Hitchens drank like it was his job. Mornings started with scotch or wine, and by afternoon he'd moved on to whiskey, vodka, or whatever was available. He once admitted that he was never fully sober past lunchtime. His friends, colleagues, and even his enemies knew that if you were meeting Hitchens, you were meeting Hitchens and his drink. Despite being constantly buzzed, he was brilliant. His ability to debate, write, and command attention never seemed to suffer, at least on the surface. He could drink glass after glass of whiskey, then go on live TV and verbally dismantle his opponents. His mind was razor sharp, even when his liver wasn't. But make no mistake, his drinking had consequences. Friends noticed his once strong voice becoming raspier, his famous wit sometimes losing its edge. He started to look tired, worn down. Years of chain smoking and drinking finally caught up to him. In 2010, he was diagnosed with esophageal cancer, the kind that heavy drinking and smoking practically guarantee. Doctors told him to quit, but he didn't see the point. He once joked that if he had his life to live over again, he would drink more, not less. Even as his body failed him, Hitchens kept writing, debating, and of course, drinking. He saw no reason to stop. It was who he was. In 2011, at 62 years old, he passed away, leaving behind a legacy of brilliant writing, sharp debates, and a lifetime of liquor-fueled intellect. Unlike Hollywood stars who drank themselves into oblivion, Hitchens never spiraled out of control, but his addiction still killed him. He was proof that even the smartest minds aren't invincible when alcohol is in the mix. Nicolas Cage. Unlike the other names on this list, he is still standing. But his reputation as Hollywood's modern-day wildcard has been fueled by years of alcohol, erratic behavior, and bizarre public meltdowns. If old-school stars drank their way into oblivion, Nicolas Cage has drunk his way into internet legend. Cage wasn't always Hollywood's unhinged meme king. In the 90s and early 2000s, he was an A-list actor with an Oscar, blockbuster hits, and critical respect. But behind the scenes, his drinking was getting out of control. Directors noticed his slurred speech, co-stars saw his erratic moods, and soon his performances started getting weirder and more unpredictable. Then, the public meltdowns started. In 2011, Cage was arrested in New Orleans for public drunkenness and disturbing the peace, after getting into a shouting match with his wife. Reports claimed he was stumbling, screaming, and too wasted to control himself. A few years later, he was caught drunkenly singing Prince's Purple Rain at a karaoke bar, so hammered that he could barely stand. The drinking wasn't just a personal issue. It wrecked his finances, too. Cage went on a spending spree fueled by booze and bad decisions, blowing through $150 million on castles, private islands, a dinosaur skull, and a pet octopus. When the IRS came knocking, he had to take every role he could get, leading to the infamous era of low-budget, straight-to-DVD Cage movies. Despite the chaos, Cage never fully collapsed like the drunks of old Hollywood. Somehow, he kept delivering performances, sometimes brilliant, sometimes downright unhinged. His 2018 film Mandy reminded people why he was a star in the first place, and in 2021, Pig earned him some of the best reviews of his career. Unlike Barrymore, Flynn, or Reed, Cage hasn't drunk himself into an early grave. Yet. But his booze-fueled antics, erratic career, and bizarre public breakdowns make him the closest thing modern Hollywood has to an old-school drunken disaster. Whether he crashes completely or somehow reinvents himself again, one thing is certain: Nicolas Cage is never boring.
One stare stopped a director cold. One scene made censors panic, and one decision nearly ended her career. Gene Simmons didn't hint. She exposed, "This isn't your grandmother's Hollywood story." War-era debut with big impact. Gene Simmons was just 14 when she stepped onto a movie set for the first time. The film, Give Us the Moon. It was a light comedy, but casting directors noticed something deeper in her, a mix of innocence and edge that didn't feel rehearsed. By 1945, she landed a small role in Caesar and Cleopatra, acting opposite Vivien Leigh and Claude Rains. Jean had no formal training, but her eyes stole every frame. Even with just a few lines, critics pointed her out. One review said she had more presence than most stars twice her age. That attention didn't go unnoticed. Back in London, she was already becoming a studio favorite. Directors liked that she followed direction perfectly, but still added something of her own. No one could quite explain it. She was quiet, respectful, but then delivered a performance with a surprising heat that caught people off guard. During this time, Britain was still recovering from war. Rationing was in full swing. But Jean was getting fitted for costumes, stepping onto grand sets and showing up in magazines. For a country looking for escape, she became a symbol of post-war hope and a bit of fantasy. Producers began casting her in roles meant for older actresses. She had the look of a teenager, but the screen presence of a woman who'd lived through something. It made her unpredictable and hard to forget. The studios liked that, so did the public. What really set her apart, though, wasn't talent alone. It was how she made every close-up feel intimate. She didn't perform to the camera. She let the camera come to her. That kind of restraint, especially at 15, felt dangerous in the best way. Ophelia role that shocked all. At only 18, she was cast opposite Laurence Olivier, who also directed and starred as Hamlet. It was a bold choice. Some said she was too young, too unknown. But Olivier saw something in her others didn't. The moment the film premiered, critics couldn't stop talking. Her Ophelia was fragile but intense. The breakdown scene where she spirals into madness hit like a punch. She didn't scream or flail. She barely raised her voice, but her eyes, they told a story no one could look away from. One director on set said, "She didn't act the scene. She became it." That scene became one of the most talked about performances of the year. Some called it mesmerizing. Others said it was too much, too raw for such a young actress. The censors weren't thrilled either. They flagged her emotional scenes as too suggestive, even though she wasn't doing anything explicit. Just her face, sad, broken, and unfiltered, made people uncomfortable. Not because she did something wrong, but because she did it too well. Her performance earned her an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actress. It was rare for a British actress that young to get that kind of recognition in Hollywood, but Jean made it look effortless. What no one saw, though, was how tightly controlled the set was. Olivier was known to push actors hard. Simmons was often left exhausted after long takes. Some scenes took over a dozen tries just to get the right version of her breakdown. She never complained. Hamlet didn't just boost her career. It showed the world she wasn't afraid of complex roles. She didn't need flashy lines or big gestures. She used silence, stillness, and just one look. This wasn't a breakout. This was a warning. Jean Simmons didn't just belong in movies. She could change how they felt. Barefoot and bold in Himalayas. Jean Simmons wasn't the lead in Black Narcissus, but she might as well have been. She played Kanchi, a teenage girl from the Himalayas. No lines, no backstory, just movement, emotion, and presence. And it was enough to shake audiences and critics. She wore a thin sari, little makeup, and walked barefoot in most scenes. Her performance wasn't subtle. It was bold, sensual, and totally silent. For someone trained in British restraint, she went the other way completely. Viewers couldn't believe it was the same girl from Hamlet. The censors? They freaked out. A British girl in brownface was already controversial, but it was her physicality, how she walked, how she looked at men, how she moved through space, that made it feel charged. Some scenes were almost cut. Critics didn't know whether to praise her or scold her. What made it even wilder? Jean was only 19. She wasn't experienced in dance or physical theater. She learned everything on the spot, guided by directors Powell and Pressburger. They told her, "Don't think, just feel." And she did. The result was magnetic. Behind the scenes, Simmons was nervous. She worried about looking ridiculous. She hated the heavy body makeup. But when she saw the final cut, she realized she'd done something rare. She made people watch without saying a word. Her performance added tension to a film already full of it. Nuns fighting desire, isolation in the mountains, repressed emotions ready to blow. Jean's character was the spark, the reminder that human want couldn't be hidden forever. She wasn't glamorized. She wasn't polished. She was raw and young and almost too real for the screen. Audiences either gasped or looked away. That role changed everything. From then on, casting directors saw her differently. She could play quiet, yes, but she could also play dangerous. Not loud or messy, but the kind of dangerous that sneaks up on you. Marriage that silenced her voice. She married Stuart Granger in 1950. On paper, it looked like a Hollywood love story. He was a big name. She was the rising star. The press called them elegant, glamorous, perfect. But the truth behind the curtain was less romantic and a lot more complicated. Granger was 16 years older. He was already famous when Jean met him on set. Their chemistry started fast. So did the control. Soon after the wedding, Granger took the reins. On decisions, on deals, even on what roles she took. The studios loved the image. They paraded the couple in magazines. But people close to Jean started noticing changes. She lost weight. She got quieter on set. Her fire was still there, but it felt dimmed. Granger didn't hide his jealousy. He hated how much attention Jean got. When she was offered lead roles, he often stepped in, saying the scripts weren't right for her. Some insiders say he even turned down roles on her behalf without telling her. Their marriage became a talking point, not for romance, but for the tension it created in her career. One studio exec said, "Jean was gold, but we couldn't get to her without going through Stewart." Still, she stayed, at least for a while. She did interviews with a smile. She played the devoted wife, but behind closed doors, she started pushing back. She wanted control over her own contracts. She wanted to work in America. Granger wasn't happy about it. The tension spilled into work. On the set of Young Bess, she reportedly clashed with crew members over last-minute changes made by Granger, who was constantly advising from behind the scenes. By the early 50s, it was clear this marriage wasn't boosting her career, it was stalling it, and Jean knew it. The girl who once shocked the screen in silence was now fighting to speak up off it. She sued Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes didn't hear no very often, but Jean Simmons gave it to him clear, firm, and without a pause. In 1951, she was under contract with the Rank organization in the UK, but Hughes wanted her for RKO in Hollywood, so he bought her contract. At first, it looked like a career jackpot. Bigger films, bigger budget, international stardom. But there was a catch. Hughes didn't want to make her a star. He wanted to own her. He sent her lavish gifts, jewelry, perfume, clothes. She sent them right back. He offered her roles, but only in projects he controlled. Scripts were delayed, promises were broken. Jean was stuck, contractually tied to RKO but barely working. Then came the final straw. Hughes tried to force her into a long-term extension. Jean said no. He pushed harder. She pushed back and sued him. That was a career gamble very few actresses would have dared to make, especially against a man with Hughes' power and reach. The court battle was ugly. She was accused of being ungrateful, difficult, spoiled, but she didn't flinch. Her attorney argued Hughes was deliberately obstructing her career, and he was. The judge sided with Jean. The court granted her the right to make one more film under RKO, but after that, she was free. That final film would be Angel Face. More on that next. The whole ordeal made headlines. Jean had taken on one of Hollywood's biggest moguls, and won. What made it wild wasn't just that she fought back, it was how calm she stayed doing it. No public outbursts, no gossip columns, just quiet, steady defiance. After the case, other actresses started to take note. Simmons had done what they were told was impossible. She stood up to the system without destroying herself in the process. Slip dress scene that stung. Angel Face was supposed to be just another noir, but Jean Simmons turned it into something unforgettable and nearly unwatchable for the censors. Directed by Otto Preminger, the film paired her with Robert Mitchum in a twisted love story full of mind games and manipulation. From her first scene, something felt off. In a good way, she wore a silk slip and moved through the frame like she knew exactly how much control she had. It was quiet, calculated, dangerous. Preminger pushed her hard. Some days she left set in tears. One scene, where she slaps Mitchum, turned chaotic. He slapped her back. For real. Not in the script. The camera kept rolling. That take made it into the final cut. The most talked about scene was filmed in her bedroom. Jean wore a skimpy nightgown that barely passed code. Her expression? Cold, unreadable, hypnotic. Studio executives tried to reshoot it. Preminger refused. Simmons never apologized. The scene stayed. Critics weren't sure what to make of her. One said she was too still, too unreadable. Another called her performance the quietest form of violence ever filmed. Audiences didn't know whether to root for her or run from her. That's exactly what Preminger wanted. Off-screen, Simmons kept it professional, but distant. She didn't like Preminger's style, but she respected the result. "It wasn't fun," she once said, but it worked. She knew what the role demanded, and she gave it, without blinking. Angel Face didn't do big box office, but it became a cult classic. Directors studied it, actresses copied her stillness, and fans replayed that one-bedroom scene like it was gospel. It proved she could lead a film, and terrify you doing it. This wasn't Jean Simmons the ingenue, this was Jean Simmons with teeth, and once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. backless photo stirred a storm. The robe was supposed to be a biblical epic, clean, reverent, traditional. But Gene Simmons made sure it came with a side of scandal, not because of anything in the script, but because of a single photograph. A promotional shot of Simmons in costume, barebacked, turned slightly, eyes locked on the lens, made its way into a national magazine. And suddenly people weren't talking about Roman history. They were talking about that image. She wasn't unclothed, but she didn't need to be. The curve of her back, the look on her face, it was suggestive without trying. It sparked a wave of backlash from conservative groups. Some theaters threatened to pull the film unless the image was censored. The studio quickly ordered retouched versions covering her back with added fabric. Simmons didn't protest. She also didn't apologize. What most people didn't know was that the robe marked the beginning of her freedom. It was her first film after winning her legal battle with Howard Hughes and RKO. No more interference, no more stalled scripts. She was finally in control of her career, or so she thought. Behind the scenes, she was still untangling contract fallout. Though legally free, industry politics meant many producers were hesitant to cast her right away. Her refusal to play by studio rules made her difficult. So even as the robe became a box office hit, Jean was still proving she was bankable and independent. She was also stepping into a new kind of role, the strong, morally complex woman. No longer the wide-eyed ingenue, she now played characters torn by faith, loyalty, and quiet desire. That's what made her stand out in the robe. While others delivered grand speeches, Jean did more with a glance or a pause. Staring down Spartacus with fire. By the mid-1950s, Gene Simmons had mastered the art of subtle danger. She didn't have to raise her voice or storm into a room to command attention. One stare from her could flip the energy of an entire scene, and nowhere was that more obvious than in Spartacus. She played Varinia, strong-willed, patient, deeply loving. But she wasn't just the love interest. She was the emotional core of the film, the quiet resistance behind Spartacus's rebellion. When Kirk Douglas's character meets her, she doesn't beg or flirt. She watches, she listens, and that look, equal parts softness and defiance, spoke volumes. The film was massive, huge budget, massive cast, but Simmons never got lost in the crowd. Even surrounded by warriors and senators, her presence held steady. One key scene in a bathhouse, fully clothed but emotionally bare, had audiences holding their breath. She wasn't there to seduce, but somehow she did. Director Stanley Kubrick said she could do more with silence than most actors could with 3 pages of dialogue. And that was true. She didn't rely on flashy performances. Her strength was restraint, holding back just enough to make viewers lean in. Her chemistry with Douglas was real, on screen at least. Off-screen, things were more tense. Douglas, ever the perfectionist, reportedly tried to direct her at times. Jean didn't bite. She followed Kubrick's lead and stuck to her style, one that didn't need constant rehearsal or rewrites, just space to breathe. What made Spartacus different was that it showed how far she had come. She was no longer being told how to act, dress, or behave. She chose this role, and she shaped it into something bigger than what was on the page. By now, Simmons had developed a signature move, holding the camera's gaze just a second too long. It was never overdone. Just enough to make the audience shift in their seats. That was her gift. Making discomfort feel beautiful. Making modesty feel provocative. Post-divorce roles, no apologies. When Gene Simmons divorced Stuart Granger in 1960, Hollywood expected her to fade into the background. Instead, she did the opposite. She stepped into some of the boldest roles of her career. She wasn't trying to shock anyone, but she was finally calling the shots. And the first move? Elmer Gantry. In the film, she played Sister Sharon Falconer, a preacher with power, mystery, and unshakable confidence. Opposite Burt Lancaster, Simmons didn't flinch. Their chemistry felt electric, even hostile at times. Her character wasn't there to be conquered. She had her own mission and her own secrets. The role marked a shift. This was Jean fully in control, no studio head pulling strings, no husband weighing in, and it showed. Critics called her performance chillingly calm and quietly commanding. Audiences saw a version of Simmons they hadn't before, fierce, focused, and completely in her element. After that, the walls came down. In interviews, she started to speak more candidly. She admitted how controlled her earlier career had been. She talked about being dressed like a doll, told where to sit, when to smile. "I wasn't rebellious," she said, "I just had a brain." She also started choosing roles that mirrored her real-life complexity. In Life at the Top, she played a woman trapped in a cold marriage, giving one of her most emotionally raw performances. Critics noted how much pain she conveyed without raising her voice. Simmons had always known how to make silence speak, but now it screamed. By 1964, she had officially left her ingenue past behind. Her new characters were layered, modern, and sometimes bitter, but never weak. Whether playing women burned by love or cornered by power, Simmons always brought a sharp, grounded realism. Her personal life, she kept it quiet, no tabloid stunts, just work, and that work spoke volumes. Gene Simmons had survived the studio system, defied Hollywood men, and walked away from a toxic marriage. What came next wasn't a comeback, it was her full arrival. TV role that changed everything. In 1983, when most of her peers had faded into cameos or early retirement, Gene Simmons made a move that surprised everyone. She went to television. And not just any TV role. She signed on for The Thornbirds, a sweeping, high-stakes miniseries that would become a cultural event. She played Fiona Cleary, the cold, emotionally distant matriarch of the family. It was a huge shift from the warm, gentle characters people associated with Simmons. Fiona wasn't cruel, but she wasn't loving either. She was closed off, wounded, and quietly ruthless. And Gene played her with absolute control. Audiences didn't just watch The Thornbirds, they devoured it. Nearly 100 million people tuned in. Simmons held her ground against heavy hitters like Richard Chamberlain and Barbara Stanwyck. And in some scenes, she stole the spotlight entirely. It wasn't just the lines she delivered. It was how she sat, how she paused, how she looked away at just the right second. For that performance, she won the Emmy. But more than that, she won back visibility. She proved that actresses over 50 weren't just background players. They could lead, they could drive a story, and they could be just as bold, if not bolder, than they'd been decades earlier. Behind the scenes, Simmons was calm, professional, and laser-focused. Younger cast members described her as gracious but guarded. She wasn't there for gossip, she was there to work. One crew member recalled, "She'd walk onto set, say almost nothing, and nail it on the first take." That role capped off her transformation from teenage ingenue to Hollywood rebel, from silent power to full-on matriarch. She had nothing left to prove, but somehow still delivered performances that left audiences stunned. Gene Simmons didn't reinvent herself, she just kept showing up exactly as she was, smart, subtle, and impossible to ignore. And by the time The Thornbirds aired, one thing was clear. She never needed to scream to make the whole room gasp.